episode of Marijuana Today Daily is brought to you by our friends over at the Atlantic Farms Medical Marijuana Dispensary of Portland, Maine, which is located right down the street from where I live and is known as being the medical marijuana dispensary that is also a gas station, where you can buy things like snacks and drinks alongside medical marijuana products. Check them out over at theatlanticfarms.com. That's theatlanticfarms.com. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Friday, October 2nd, 2020, and you're tuned in to episode 986 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shade Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. We start today's news off with a nicer story out of Colorado, as Governor Jared Polis signed an executive order yesterday granting pardons to just over 2,700 people with cannabis possession charges on their records. The sweeping pardon covers everyone convicted of having an ounce of marijuana or less in the state between the years 1978 and 2012 and was made possible by a bill signed into law earlier this summer by Governor Polis. There was some pressure on the governor to expand the pardon to people with up to 2 ounces of cannabis, which he has the power to do. But Governor Polis said in an FAQ posted online that since Colorado state law allows for the legal possession of just 1 ounce, that he was sticking to that level for his pardon for now. The beautiful thing about this move is that it's automatic. People don't need to do anything to get the pardon. That's how social justice reform in this realm needs to be handled. Give this one a read. Jumping from Colorado and some news on the nicer spectrum, we leap over to Vermont for a story on the other side. This time we have Vermont Republican Governor Phil Scott signaling that he might not actually sign Senate Bill 54 into law, which would set up a taxed and regulated sales marijuana program, citing the legislation's less than perfect social justice provisions. That's pretty rich reasoning coming from a Republican, given that his whole party has been given over to violent racist thugs, and cannabis activists in Vermont are saying it's more likely that Governor Scott is just panicking after lawmakers actually went ahead and changed Senate Bill 54 in committee to address his concerns, and the good governor just does not want to sign it. Vermont famously passed legal adult use legalization in 2018, but neglected to include a sales program. Read all about the whole thing over at Marijuana Moment. Our final top story in the day is the news that Colorado-based marijuana company Schwazze just announced that it is not following through with a planned acquisition of fellow Colorado company MedPharm. You might remember that Schwazze used to be called Medicine Man Technologies and has made a lot of news over the past year or so with a long string of announced acquisitions, many of which have fallen through in recent days. In addition to the scuttled MedPharm deal, Schweiz is also passing on its purchase of the very large outdoor Los Sueños Farms, dispensary chain Strawberry Fields, and concentrates producer Dabble Extracts, all located within Colorado. Those are the top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz it in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, the Atlantic Farms Medical Marijuana Dispensary of Portland, Maine, which is located right down the street from where I live and is known as being the medical cannabis dispensary that is also a gas station, where you can buy things like snacks and drinks alongside medical marijuana products. The Atlantic Farms is one of the best places in the Pine Tree State to get a full sampling of what our great state has to offer up for cannabis consumers, as the folks behind the Atlantic Farms place a lot of emphasis on working with a wide spectrum of local farmers and producers. And because everyone at the Atlantic Farms prides themselves on being a place for everyone to find medical relief with the use of cannabis, their prices are always reasonable and affordable. And best of all, you can save some time when you visit by doubling up and getting some gas for your car. Learn more about the Atlantic Farms and browse their menu over at theatlanticfarms.com. And if you do stop in and say hello, make sure to tell them that I sent you. That's theatlanticfarms.com. All right, time for the Blitz. Kyle Yeager over Marijuana Moment has a good write-up on a new set of polls out of Arizona looking at how people in that state feel about legal cannabis. That comes just a month before voters in Arizona will cast their votes on a ballot measure to allow for legal adult use sales. The two polls, conducted by activist group Smart and Safe Arizona and the prohibitionist group Smarter Approaches to Marijuana, show different pictures for how the populace feels about the question, with the prohibitionist numbers showing a closer race in terms of support versus non-support. It's important here to point out that Smarter Approaches to Marijuana has, in the past, run very loose with numbers and facts to support their outdated view on drug reform, so I wouldn't put too much stock in their line. Lots of good detail and background here, maybe not a bad one to read in full. Snapping back to my hometown of Portland, Maine, we have more than a quarter of all the applicants in line for adult use marijuana business licenses at risk of being disqualified for various reasons, mostly to do with failing to pay taxes and fees on time or zoning issues such as being located too close to a school. 43 entities in all applied for the 20 adult use licenses up for grabs in Portland, and according to Penelope Overton at the Press Herald, 12 of those are in danger of being booted from the process. Those 12 applicants have 10 days to respond to the city. If you do business here in Portland, this is a storyline you have to have a solid handle on, so maybe also give this one a dive in. The presumed future prosecutor in Washtenaw County, Michigan, has announced that his office will not prosecute psilocybin mushroom possession charges following a recent move by the Ann Arbor City Council to decriminalize psychedelic plants. While Eli Savitt has not actually been voted into office yet, he is running unopposed in his race in a solidly Democratic county, so it's all but a foregone conclusion that he will be in charge of his county's prosecutorial efforts. This is just a small part of the larger storyline of nationwide psychedelic reform. Multi-state cannabis operator Acreage Holdings has raised $33 million in funding in a deal that hints at a possible thawing of the marijuana capital market. You might remember that Acreage borrowed $15 million in June in a bridge loan carrying a hugely high annual interest rate of 60%, well above the normal rate for corporate funding deals. This new $33 million deal comes with a more reasonable annual rate of 7.5% over 3 years and will be used in part to pay a different high-interest note the company took out in May. Earlier this week, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a number of cannabis-related bills into law, with none making huge changes to the state's cannabis program, but making substantial enough effects to pay attention to. One bill, AB 1525, would remove state-level penalties for banks working with cannabis businesses, though of course federal restrictions still apply. One bill in particular, AB 67, should be welcomed by cultivators who can now apply so-called appellations to their products, which allow products grown or produced within certain areas the exclusive rights to market themselves as such. Think Napa Valley or Bordeaux wines, but in our industry, it'll be the likes of Humboldt County and the Emerald Triangle. Given the number of bills signed into law by Governor Newsom this week, I'd add this one to your list of stories to read in full. Taking a jump up to Canada, we have some new numbers out of the Ontario Cannabis Store showing that the price of legal adult use marijuana in the province is softening, dropping closer to matching illicit market levels. A new report has the average price of legal cannabis in Ontario for April and June dropping to $7.05 per gram Canadian, which includes taxes, which was actually lower than the average price found on illicit market online shops during that same period. It's estimated that just a quarter of all cannabis sales in Ontario happen via the legal markets, with the rest flowing through illicit channels, so the price of legal marijuana is something that operators need to keep an eye on. And finally for today, we have the House of Representatives voting yesterday on a coronavirus relief bill that includes text from the Secure and Safe Enforcement Banking Act, or SAFE Act, which would remove federal financial penalties for banks working with cannabis businesses, a very long-running storyline in our industry. This is now the third time that the House has passed the Safe Banking Act language, and will likely be the third time the legislation has been killed by Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, one of the worst people around. Still, though, decent enough news here. Kyle Yeager has more on this if you want. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again Tuesday morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, Atlantic Farms, and to all of our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says, Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today. Today.
One take, Shay. One take.